All right, let's get started. My name is Mark Gold, and I'm the acting director of UCLA's Institute of the Environment and Sustainability. Thank you guys so much for coming here for this important day. To start off with, before I introduce Glenn, I do want to say that I do believe that John Muir is still relevant after a century. I'm sure a lot of people. As somebody who personally has been in the conservation field my entire life, I don't know if you know, I used to run the environmental group Heal the Bay for about 25 years. And for me, frankly, he's always been a tremendous hero of mine. And the reason why he's been such an inspiration was because he took such a long view on conservation, which I think is absolutely so critical. And also for me, on a personal note, Yosemite is an example. It's just been such a huge part of my life. And it's not just that my parents took me up there probably half a dozen times growing up, but had a wonderful tradition where me, my wife, and my 3 kids went up there every Father's Day weekend for 10 straight years. And so for me, it's just been the place, other than the beach, as you might gather, where I escape the stress of everyday life and really makes me think about things in a completely different way. And to me, I think wilderness is really where you find it. So whether it's saving a beach, a wetland, grasslands, forest, it's all about saving them for future generations to enjoy. And I think really that's what John Muir's legacy has been, is really inspiring all of us who have put so much time and effort into trying to make that happen. So not only just escape from everyday stress, but also to really enjoy the most spiritual places on earth. And anybody who's been to Yosemite Valley during the middle of the summer realizes you will not find a more diverse place on this planet than what you see on the floor of Yosemite, just as you will not see a more diverse place than if you go to the beach right near Santa Monica Pier. So there really are special places that everybody indeed enjoys. And so anyways, just wanted to get that part over with. So now it is my pleasure, I'm very privileged to introduce UCLA's John Muir Memorial Chair in Geography, Professor Glen MacDonald. He's a distinguished professor, a UC Presidential Chair. He's a biologist in ecology and evolutionary biology, and he's the former director of the Institute of the Environment and Sustainability. He did hire me as his associate director of the Institute. I don't know whether to blame him and thank him for that, but for today, definitely thank you very much, Glenn. And also as a climate scientist focusing on paleoclimate and drought issues, Glenn is also a past chair of AAAS Geology and Geography section, which is an incredible, incredible honor. Glenn is Canadian, and for those of you who know Glenn, this seems to be his most important achievement. It seems to be a lot more important than his numerous, and I mean numerous, academic awards, which I will not go through, but it really is extensive. And although this isn't a Canadian event, it is fitting that both he and Muir were both members of the Commonwealth, so they do have that in common. But I think now that he is the John Muir Chair, he really needs to start rocking the Muir beard, so hopefully everyone will support him in that regard. So with that, my pleasure to introduce Glen MacDonald as our brand new John Muir Memorial Chair.
Okay, I have to call, first of all, I was delighted that I could convince Mark to come here, and I was delighted that he would take over from me as the interim director of the Institute, and he's done a fabulous job for UCLA. I can't overstate how much he's done. Mark Gold. Now I'm going to give him one other compliment. UCLA is in its centennial year, and we are going to be having centennial events, but UCLA has launched a series of grand challenges where the university the power of this university is students and faculty, our staff, everyone here can actually change the world for the better. And what was the first grand challenge that UCLA announced, that UCLA started? It's a grand challenge to make LA the environmental city of the future. 100% energy efficient, 100% renewable energy, 100% local water, and preserving all of our biodiversity. And Mark has led that, and I think this is a remarkable thing to do on the centenary after Muir, and as the second centenary of UCLA. And so it's a very, very exciting space here at UCLA. I also want to comment, though, about the beard. My graduate students and postdocs have told me I have to grow a beard now, like more or less like, I'm not sure I'm capable of growing a beard like that. And yeah, I do direct the Canadian Studies program here at UCLA and enjoy it very. Any other Canadians out there? There we go, my good man. Where's my wife? Because there she is. She's been in California so long, she's kind of losing it, eh? So I do also, though, I do have to correct Mark. So Muir was a Scot. My last name happens to be MacDonald, if anyone hadn't noticed. Muir spent time in Ontario. He spent a very formative period in Ontario, Canada. It's the same place where I met my wife, and I was a professor for many, many years. So there is a connection there. But then both of us have found our way to stay in California for most of our lives. So that says something about the environment here. There's been a bit of controversy, it roiled across the pages of the LA Times between myself and my good friend and valued colleague, John Christensen, and then people speaking here about Muir's legacy. And I want to take as much dispassionate as I can, look at that and set the stage for the incredible panels and talks and individuals, diverse views that we're going to see in the rest of the afternoon. I want to set the stage in a little bit by looking at Muir, and then these people are going to build on the future primarily. So that's what I want to do. I want to look at, and it's a century beyond Muir, question mark. You know, is this century beyond Muir's ideas, beyond Muir's legacy? Has so much changed? And let's explore that. So, John Muir is dead. That's the provocative first graphic image in the issue of Boom. And again, please pick that up. It's free for you out there. Please subscribe. It's a wonderful magazine edited by John Christensen. So, is John Muir dead? Is this legacy simply got no more relevance for us, as much as emotionally we may individually be moved by Muir's writing and his ethos? Has so much changed with our state, nation, and the world? Well, first off, of course, we are living in a California with a population size and a population diversity that would have been almost unimaginable to Muir. And when Muir passed away, the state had only 3 million people. That was it. That was the totality. 2014, 100 years later, we have 38 million people in the state. We're talking greater than an order of magnitude growth in the population of this state. By 2050, it's estimated the state will be home to some 50 million people. But not only has the number of people increased, but the demography, the racial composition has changed and changed greatly. There is a majority, at that point, of course, there were people of Mexican heritage, the Californinos, there were Native Americans, there was an Asian population, African American population, but really this was an Anglo state in 1914. And clearly Muir's audience were an Anglo-American European audience. There no longer is any plurality, and we will soon have a state which is majority Hispanic. So huge demographic shifts have occurred in the state since the time of Muir. If we take a look at Yosemite Valley, Yosemite wrote in his, these are pictures all from Muir's time. So Muir wrote, particularly in his private correspondence, about visitors to Yosemite. And sometimes he would be disappointed when people didn't kind of get it, when they didn't get the wonder, the awe. They didn't see it as the natural cathedral. It wasn't a life-changing experience for them when they were mere tourists. But then he would always kind of end it with saying, "Oh, but you know, it's fine. They're harmless. They're coming. People are coming." Yosemite today has 3.7 million visitors a year. Now that sounds pretty damn impressive. That's pretty good. And of course, people here have commented on the pressures on Yosemite Valley by having so many visitors, so many people, particularly concentrated in the valley. On the other hand, if you look carefully at those numbers, there's some very important things. One, Yosemite visitorship peaked in the early 1990s and declined after that. It is lower now than it was a decade, 15 years ago. It goes up a little bit, it comes down. But this is not the peak of Yosemite usage that we're seeing today. Now, the Yosemite usage is somewhat diverse, but if we look at the figures in terms of its diversity, what we see is that African Americans, Hispanics in particular, are demographically underrepresented in terms of park visitors, not just to Yosemite, but throughout the national park system. And this has really become an issue of concern, both regionally. For instance, the Southwest National Parks has issued a report on it, nationally, and of course just in terms of California, that we are seeing fewer users in some of these parks, and they tend to be white, and they tend to be male, and they tend to be aging. And projections into the 21st century suggest that even though the population of the country may be growing, the proportion of park visitors is shrinking, and absolute park usage will decline. Now, we may say that's great, that won't be so much pressure in Yosemite Valley, but it also means you will lose the political will to have these parks, to have a conservation ethos, and to have the funding that you need to support that. I think it's a double-edged sword, and I know where Muir would have voted. He would have voted for people. But potentially, Muir might be part of the problem here. You know, when you read Muir's writings, there was a large Hispanic population in California at that time. Los Angeles had a Hispanic population. He was aware of it. He said directly, he said, Los Angeles, okay, that handsome, conceited little town, that's how he described it. And then he talked about where, curiously, clapboards and adobes tumble up against each other in antagonism. God, I wish I knew what exactly he wanted to say with that sentence and what he meant. What was he really seeing there? Was it just about architecture? I just don't know. But the fact was, he does not write anywhere at all about that rich tradition, about the people of California at that time. And some people feel that because his objective was to reach relatively well-to-do, influential Anglo-European Americans, he moved the wilderness and the appreciation of nature away from people of color, away from a large proportion of the population in this state, even at that time, and that we are now seeing the repercussions of that in our park visitorship. And I think this is an omission on the part of Muir, and I would like to get deeper and understand that. His relationship with Native Americans was problematic, and that relationship has caused very real problems indeed. On one hand, he wrote about the unfairness of taking land away from Native Americans in Wisconsin, taking land away from Native Americans in California. On the other hand, he took a very jingoistic view in his writing and journalism about the Indian Wars in northeastern California, Captain Jack, and that whole sad episode in California history. He almost had a palpable fear at that point. In his individual dealings with Native Americans, Miwok tribe, for instance, in the Yosemite Western Sierras or down into the Mono Basin, he is not complimentary. He describes them as dirty. He describes some of the Native Americans in Wisconsin as being shifty, untrustworthy, lazy. On the individual basis, he didn't seem to show any appreciation. In the wilderness, they didn't fit his perception of wilderness of perfection. And things like, for instance, people would put dirt and mud on their face to protect themselves from the sun. That was a technique that was used by Native Americans. He saw that as just simply, his Scottish Calvinistic upbringing. They weren't fastidious in personal hygiene. This then becomes a practical as well as an ethical problem for us. He took no notice of the important native land use practices such as fires. And as we'll hear later today, the implications of that, his work along with Gifford Pinchot, the founder of the U.S. Forest Service, led to the mentality that all forest fires are bad and must be stamped out, which has led to then the proliferation of fuels in some of our forests and some of the massive fires we are seeing today in the beloved Sierras. I wish that he had spent more time getting to know Native peoples here in California. On the other hand, he is much more complimentary about Native peoples in Alaska. And why the dichotomy there, I'm not sure. And on the higher level, he understood that America in the late 19th and early 20th century was doing a disservice to its Native people. But on the personal level and in some of his writings, that generosity conviction is not there, and it is sorely missed. Now, it's not just the demography of the state and Muir's blindness to some aspects we know today are important. Maybe reflecting, as Laura Polito said today in the Los Angeles Times, he's reflecting the setting, the time that he lived in. And we can't give him a complete pass, but that's true. But the world is changing. The very, very world in which we live in is changing. Muir is lauded for two things in glaciology. He argued against Whitney, the state geologist, and many of the main figures in geology of the time, that Yosemite and Hetch Hetchy and other major valleys in the Sierra were scoured and formed by glaciation, where they felt they were entirely tectonic. Muir, almost self-trained, he went to school at the University of Wisconsin but never got a degree, was correct. We know he was correct. Whitney's got the tallest mountain named after him, but Muir had it right. Muir also found the first glacier discovered in the Sierra. He found it. He hiked up and found the very first glacier that was ever discovered in the Sierra. And he published on it. And after that, a number of glaciers were discovered in the Sierras. Muir's glacier is gone now. It is completely melted. Projections are somewhere between 50 to 250 years, there probably will be no more living glaciers in the Sierras because of climate change. Temperatures by the end of the century, conservatively, will increase in the winter by about 5 degrees Fahrenheit and in the summer by 7 degrees Fahrenheit. Not only will the glaciers, which Muir surely loved here in California and certainly in Alaska, disappear, but the vegetation zones that define the Sierra, and particularly the high elevation tundra, in many areas may disappear. His first summer in the Sierra, he spent a great deal of time grazing sheep in the high elevations. He knew a lot about the natural history and the botany of those places. Those places may simply disappear along with his glaciers, certainly a century beyond him. The giant sequoias, which of course he's famous for. If anyone has followed this, he brought down a seed and planted it in Martinez at his ranch there, his orchard. And they are desperately trying to get genetic material to clone that, because under the warm temperatures of Martinez, it is susceptible to pathogens and is indeed dying. Analysis by U.S. Forest Service said that warming may bring the same type of pathogenic threat to the current groves of giant sequoia along the western Sierra. So these trees, which he deified, almost literally, under climate warming, they may disappear from the sites where we preserve them today in parks such as Kings Canyon and Sequoia. The other thing that Muir seemed to miss, and that we'll be discussing today, is he put wilderness as a place far away, a distant place that you travel to, in most, but not all of his writing, I'm going to add. And he seemed to miss the fact that you could have nature in your midst in a city, in a community where people actually lived, that you could commune and get the same spiritual benefits, the same physical benefits close to home. Yosemite, the Sierras, distant places like Alaska. Now, maybe reflecting on the cities that he knew that may have influenced his thinking on this. This is Dumbarton, Scotland, at the time of Muir, more or less Muir's youth, maybe a little bit later than that. Folks, this isn't the Highlands with people doing the fling and playing the pipes. It's flat, semi-industrial, agrarian area with gray stone buildings and sort of a gray climate. I'm just almost glad that we were pushed off our land and came over to Canada. But anyway, you might find a bit of nature there, but you might not find much of it. In his writings, though, he talks about as a youth, how important it was to go out and play in the fields around Dumbarton and explore there. He got it, and he understood that. He would understand the movement that we have today to creating those spaces in the city, because in his own writings, he said how much it influenced him as a young man. Then you take a look at Los Angeles, that handsome, conceited little town, about the time Muir first visited there. You know, and again, right in the downtown area, well, there isn't a whole lot of purchase for nature there. But today, 95% of Californians live in cities. We're the most, despite all the natural wonders, most urbanized state in the Union. We have to connect with people in the urban nature. We have to bestow an appreciation of it that is greater, perhaps, than Muir was capable of doing. Now, Muir did see the state as a segmented place. His Martinez Ranch agricultural land was important to him. Of course, the Sierra and the mountains. But the guy in the winters lived in San Francisco until he moved to the Martinez Ranch. He used a car to get around. In fact, in the great debates about should the car enter Yosemite at the beginning of the 20th century, he came down in favor of using the car. He used the car to do his explorations in the Southwest, such as his trip to the Petrified Forest. But he did have this concept of three things, and it's very, very clear in his writing. We now know, and as will be discussed by more erudite, knowledgeable people than myself, such as Richard White later on today, that maybe that's probably a bad and oversimplistic way of looking at it. But if you look at the city at the time, and this is again Los Angeles looking at Pico House, he gives very short shrift to the city, and then off he goes to the San Gabriel Mountains. But there was lots of nature there when you moved off the main street. And you kind of wish he had taken a little time to do that, you know, a little time to look at that. His description of it was about the exotic plants that were growing, that people could grow things like bananas, and there were palm trees in Los Angeles. And you do wish that he had taken a little wider look at what the cities can offer. The other thing that's changed, and has changed seriously, is national capacity to do what we want to do here, to conserve nature, to build urban natural systems, to protect the national parks that we have. He was a firm believer in the federal government. That's why he pushed to have Yosemite moved out of state hands and into federal hands. He believed that only the federal government could preserve these special places. He pushed to have a park service. But the fact of the matter is that the GDP in his day was the federal debt was about 4% of the GDP. Today, the federal debt stands at 70% of the gross domestic product. As he found out with Hetch Hetchy, you can't depend on the federal government. And that's probably more so true today than it was in the past. We need new models, new cooperative models, in order to preserve and conserve these places that are important to us. The economics have changed incredibly, and federal capacity and will has probably changed. Now, but let's think about it. Should we throw his entire legacy out? What were the things that he really thought were important? First of all, he thought that nature was worth preserving in and of itself. That beautiful places, that water, that rocks, that trees and living organisms had a value that could not necessarily be specified economically, that may not be used to build a giant city, but in and of themselves, they were worth preserving. I think we still have that ethos. I think that ethos then is important, and if we don't have it, we will not conserve or preserve anything, because in lots of cases, there is no sound economic value to doing that. It is simply the right thing to do. I'm not going to throw that out. Secondly, Muir did not believe in fencing off these wilderness areas for just the chosen few. As I mentioned, he came down on the side of allowing automobiles to the national parks because he really believed that nature and open spaces, and the wilderness as he called it, were important for people. And one of the most important things it could do is to help people, and that they should have the opportunity to visit there. We think about this guy as always out there on his own, the rugged individual. You know, go and look at the photo archives at the Pacific University, for example. He's out having picnics, he's out with his family, he's out with huge groups of people, he's doing things close to home. He wrote about the San Gabriel Mountains, how wonderful it was that people from San Gabriel, Angelino, had such a close place to go out and enjoy. He kind of understood that. He was about nature, yes, but he was also about people. I am not someone who says that we're going to lock up Yosemite and the only people who can go there are people who can hike 50 miles in and out. I just don't think that's right. If we want to support our wilderness areas, people have to feel that they have ownership, that they're part of that. Whether it's a redeemed brown lot in the city or it's something like Yosemite. So I stand by Muir in the idea that these places should be accessible, that people should enjoy them. I don't think we want to throw that out. He showed us that to achieve anything, you have to do it as a group, as a team, in collaboration. He was the first president of the Sierra Club to do just that. He worked and compromised all over the place. He did not believe in big game hunting, but he was great pals with Teddy Roosevelt because they shared certain goals, and he would work together. Activists today, advocates for the environment, why do they form NGOs besides to get money? No, but to bring together like-minded people to achieve those goals. He really kind of wrote the book on how to do that as an environmentalist. I think certainly more so than Emerson or Thoreau or others. Putting together a group. And that's a great contribution. We benefit that today. How many people belong to or run an NGO, belong to a group, anything like that was a group activity for conservation of the environment? Okay. You can thank Muir for that involvement. We're not willing to throw that out. Folks, we have 7,599,139 acres of national parklands in California. Protects the biodiversity of that state, provides recreational opportunities, in some cases helps protect and conserve our history. Believe there's 85 million acres of national parks in the United States. In California alone, we have over 30 different types of parklands, national monuments, and things like that. Muir's push for the National Park Service, his push for that ethos of setting aside certain lands, that's the product of that. We all benefit from that, whether we go out to the Santa Monicas or we go off to the most remote national park in Alaska. Whether we go to a tiny park like Cabrillo that we can drive and park your car at, or you take a ferry over to the Channel Islands. This is Muir's gift to us. I'm not willing to throw that out. I think that this is an incredible gift to us. I want us not to think then, and there's lots to criticize Muir about, we need to move beyond him in many, many ways. But I don't want to think about him as a rigid old man railing against his final defeat. I want to think about the young Muir, the idealist, the man of, exciting ideas and was like a sponge for knowledge, who balanced, working in a timber mill with his love for nature, who balanced working as a shepherd with his love for nature, who had to make those compromises, who had to think ahead, who had to be an entrepreneur and light on his feet, and would suck up new ideas. I want to think about the young Muir. I want to think about that's the Muir that we want to have our dialogue with. I think we would have brought him around to lots of what we've been talking about had he lived 100 years and were with us today. I don't think he was so rigid that he would have held to those beliefs. I think he would be right with us right in here today, helping us energize things. And what this meeting about is not so much a discussion about John Muir, the person, anyway. What this meeting about is about the new Muirs, who you're all going to hear in these panels. The people who are taking ideas, whether or not they agree with Muir, whether or not they feel his legacy is important anymore, but are taking ideas of what's best for the environment, what's best for all the people in California and beyond, and putting those things into action. That's the excitement of today, not a debate about Muir's legacy, but these fantastic people who are going to tell us what the next 100 years are like. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.